You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
It's my pleasure to be here today with Fishkin, who I've known for more years than I care to count. He and I go way back in the search engine marketing business, and his new business, SparkToro, is sort of an outgrowth of his understanding of semantics and search and context. And he's created a really fantastic tool. My team uses it. And so I'd love to hear the origin story for sort of what caused you to sort of take yet another run at entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, Kevin, thank you for having me, and good to see you as always. So when I left Moz, which was 2018, I knew that I wanted to kind of prove to myself and also, a few people whose belief in me had faltered over the years at my old company that I could do this again, and that I could do it effectively and make a good product and serve customers well. And that desire was very strong. Also, very frankly, I needed work, and I think maybe I showed in my latter years at Moz after I stepped down as CEO that I am not fantastic at working for someone else. So entrepreneurship seemed like the way to go. And this problem that SparkToro is hopefully helping a lot of folks to solve, which I'm thrilled to hear that it's helping your team, is something that fundamentally Casey, my co-founder, and I saw kind of early in our journey with the company, even just talking to, usually it was agencies and consultants, but sometimes in-house providers who, in order to better understand their customer base and potential customers, they built software like a crawler internally at their company to go get all of their email lists' social URLs. So they'd send their customer list through Clearbit or Full Contact or something like that, and they'd get back, okay, here's their Twitter profile, here's their LinkedIn, here's their here's their YouTube channel or YouTube account, here's them on Reddit, whatever social URLs they could acquire, Facebook, you can name it. And then they would have their crawlers go and retrieve data from there to show, what do they follow on those social channels? What do they like? What do they listen to? What do they subscribe to? What words and phrases do they use? What do they talk about? Sort of, topic analysis, hashtags, demographic data, if they could get it. And it's actually a royal pain in the butt. Like, this whole process of crawling all these networks, connecting up people, huge pain in the butt. And so, we were talking to companies that spent literally six figures to do one analysis, right? They took their one email list of whatever, their 50,000 customers, and they would spend $300,000 to go, okay, we're going to have these two engineers build this product out, and a product manager and a marketer, all working together on this thing. Holy crap. And Casey and I thought, we should just build that for the whole internet. Let's just see if we can crawl enough of the web, the public social web, and connect up enough profiles to be able to make a huge index that anyone can search across. So instead of, an 18-month project with a team of 4 people in-house that you're spending a fortune on, you can get the answer to the question, hey, tell me about this audience and their online behaviors and demographics in 20 seconds. That's what SparkToro is. And so, we essentially help lots of folks in marketing, but also folks outside of marketing with audience research, just understanding the behaviors and demographics of any online group.
Great. Well, you've been in the news recently, and I hopefully will get this video edited fairly quickly so we can get it out there when it's still topical. But there's obviously a lot of debate as to the Twitter profiles. How many of them are bots? How many of them are authentic? How many of them are authentic but just not users, you've got monthly active users, you've got daily active users, and then of course bots can be active and humans can be active, and there's this sort of, many ways of parsing that data, right? And of course the semantics around that is with regards to Elon Musk's bid for Twitter, right? And the fact that he's now saying that he disagrees with Twitter's filings with regards to what percentage of their monthly user base are fake or bots. And you did a collaborative study and you came up with your own numbers using obviously your own set of fairly conservative metrics as far as my perspective goes. But you diced it and sliced it in a different way and came up with another number. So I'd love you to sort of walk through the study, but also walk through the thinking of how you did the cutoffs, right? Because you sort of had to place the cutoffs in certain places as to sort of at what level is something more likely to be a bot than a human, because only the bot and the human know for sure, right? And so you can't ask them. And even a bot could be programmed to give you the right answer. So given that, you had to sort of go through the process of making these decisions about where you thought the prudent cutoffs were for gauging authenticity and humanity.
Yeah, that's right. So let's see. I'll tell you that when we kicked this off, it was mostly because some reporters had reached out to us. We've been running this fake followers free research tool that anyone can use. The methodology is relatively straightforward, but it's something that we needed to build for ourselves. So I mentioned what our audience research tool does, right? Where it sort of connects up all these profiles. And one of the things we wanted to do was avoid crawling and indexing spam or bots or propaganda or misinformation, because that stuff would make all of the data that people retrieve in an audience research tool like ours cloudy, right? It'd just be, I have to kind of dig through this junk. And is this a real hashtag? Like, why do people keep using the, fund my BTC wallet hashtag or whatever it is? And it's like, oh, that's mostly spam. And so we don't want to include that kind of stuff. And for that reason, because we had this long running tool for it, lots of folks from media, half a dozen, folks from media reached out and said like, hey, can you validate or verify Twitter statements or Musk statements or, what the real answer is? And the answer is we can do some things that are potentially interesting directionally, but as I noted, at the top of the report in methodology and at the bottom of the report again in like frequently asked questions and in the Twitter thread where I post about it, we cannot know what Twitter counts as an MDAU, a monthly daily active user, like someone who, is active inside Twitter on a daily basis each month. All right. So we can't know that. So let's do the next best thing, which is to analyze a sample set of both, randomly selected Twitter profiles, giant, huge sum of them, and specifically selected Twitter profiles that have activity that suggests they did something last month, i.e. they sent a tweet or reply. That's the only thing that Twitter's API will show you. And so we analyzed, I think it was 5 different groups of data with varying methodology. I think Elon Musk's suggestion on Twitter on Saturday morning or whatever was that you should take a random 100 followers of the @Twitter account, which is obviously too small a sample size, but we nevertheless did that as well and applied our methodology to that. And, 16 of the 100 that we looked at in that data set look to us a lot like fake spam, bot, inactive, inauthentic profiles, right? Not a human being behind there, like actually logging into Twitter, on their phone or their desktop and seeing the content that Twitter, that the people that they follow produces or that any Twitter ads might produce. And then we tried a methodology, which was to look at all of @Elon Musk's followers, like all 93 million of them. We ran every single one through our fake follower tool. It took like 36 hours or something. And okay, in that case, 70% of them look like they are not actually seeing Elon's tweets, right? There's not a human being on the other side who actually sees what he tweets. Now that still means, you're talking about 30 million people who see his tweets, when he posts. So, he's got a powerful, obviously, account, but it is not 93 million. Then we analyzed only active users, only people who follow Elon and had sent a tweet in the last 90 days or reply. And using that metric, it's much lower. It's like 23% of those look fakey, spammy body. And certainly when he looks at his replies, I'm sure he's like, no, it must be more than that. But to us, it looks like, it's about, 23%. Anyway, then we looked at a random sample from Follower Wonk's database, who we worked with in the tool. That data set, they have more than a billion, I think it's 1.1 something billion profiles, billion Twitter profiles. And when you think about that, and Twitter says we have 230 million active daily users out of 1.1 billion profiles that you can find on twitter.com or through the app. Well, so does that mean Twitter essentially is saying only 70% or only 25% or a little bit less of our total use, all the users you could find on here are what we count as MDAUs. So no wonder we're finding so much stuff that doesn't look active, right? And so we took from this 1.1 billion, we took the 150 million profiles that Follower Wonk had seen send a tweet in the last 9 weeks or tweet or reply. And then we took a random sample of those, 45,000 or so, analyzed them. The number was 19.7% that looked spam, fake, bots, inactive, not real people. And that's the number that we think probably best represents if you were to take a random sample of someone who looked active on Twitter, meaning they sent a tweet or a reply in the last couple of months, that number seems to be most accurate. Does it match MDAUs? We cannot know. We cannot know.
Absolutely. Well, it was really fun to see your name in print and to see the study and to see how many different ways you sliced and diced the data to come up with numbers. And I think the one common thing across those numbers was it certainly they all seem to indicate that 5% was a pretty low estimate with regards to the amount of bots and or inauthentic profiles.
I think that it could be, a few people have mentioned that it's a little bit comparing apples and oranges, which I think is fair, right? Like Twitter is saying not 5% of all Twitter accounts that you might see are spam or fake. They're saying 5% of what we count as MDAUs are fake, and we just can't know what that is. The problem is the experience that people have on Twitter. And I think this is the point that our research really hammers home, is that Twitter might be saying, hey, less than 5% of MDAUs, that are monetizable. But for a human being's experience on Twitter, if you're talking about 1 billion plus accounts and only, a quarter of those are active, real people, the rest are at best not doing anything, right? And at worst, they're spamming you and doing phishing schemes and propaganda and misinformation and trying to spread stuff that should not be spread. It seems to me that is a big problem that's also worth discussing. And frankly, if I were at Twitter, I'd be thinking very hard about could we maybe get rid of a few 100 million of those and make our product better as a result?
It's interesting you mentioned getting rid of some of the fallow profiles, because whether you're a startup or not, or whether you're just somebody coming out with a new product under a major company or brand, it's pretty common to have a similar experience in Twitter handles as one would have in the domain name space of, oh man, it's taken. Except in the case of Twitter, it's a tweet that was sent 14 years ago is the only thing in that profile, right? And there's been no attempt to do any garbage collection or cleaning. So, part of that gulf between the billion plus and the actives are just people who maybe used Twitter once or 0 times. Like all they did was grab a handle. And, it was interesting, because I run a nonprofit that's in the cause marketing space, I was sort of thinking at one point, like, they should just auction off for charity the ones that are not active, right? And do their best attempt to contact the originator of the handle, because they have their email address, but that's one of the they're the only ones who can tie PII to a handle, right? And so, they would be the ones to be able to say, countdown, you've got 1 month, you've got 1 week, you've got 1 day, just like an expiring domain would, right? But because they're free and they're eternal, right? Apparently, for Twitter handles, I've always felt like it's a real waste because it clutters unnecessarily the Twitter ecosystem. So if Elon does end up taking over, which he may or may not, I hope that he goes through and comes up with a rational methodology by which they can clean out the garbage. And that doesn't necessarily mean just deletion of inactive profiles, but there should be an attempt made to sort of activate them and get them to use it if they're going to be in there or not. And if they're not going to be in there, maybe that could go up for auction or become available for resale or whatever. It could be done with social impact or it could be done otherwise. But I do think, each social network faces its own bot and spam and abandoned profile problem. I think Twitter's is unique because they really did proliferate for some reason in Twitter.
No, I think Twitter, for whatever reason, I think, partially incentivized the creation of a lot of bots and spam, and also has an ecosystem where those are quite problematic because of how the visibility of content works in Twitter as compared to, Facebook or Instagram, where, if you're not following someone or something, you're very unlikely to see it. They just don't have the concept, the same constructs around the retweet or the show people who replied to things, or, the default publicity and the degree to which people who use Twitter realize that it has an outsized impact on the information ecosystem of our world, take advantage of that, right? And so those incentives mean, you get more political actors in there, you get more spam, you get more disinformation, you get more harassment. Instagram obviously has some of these problems too, but my wife, for example, right, Geraldine, is a very prominent author and feminist and outspoken person on many social issues, and nowhere does she have to deal with the death threats and hate and threats of violence and often sexualized violence that she does on Twitter. And I don't think, obviously personally, I find it's repulsive and scary and, security concerns, all that kind of stuff, which is awful. But also, I don't understand why Twitter as a corporation wants to enable that. That doesn't make good sense it doesn't make good business sense to me. I think fundamentally it drives a lot of good people off of the platform. It dissuades a lot of people who might otherwise consider using Twitter from wanting to use it, especially people who realize they're going to get harassed. If you're a woman or a person of color, or if you're GLBTQ, or any of these sort of folks who receive outsized amounts of hate on Twitter and harassment. Why would you want to participate in that ecosystem? And my suspicion is Twitter, as a result, loses a tremendous amount of opportunity in business and puts out a lot more terrible things into the world versus kind and good and positive things. I don't understand the philosophy behind it, either from an pure economics decision, or from a social good perspective.
Yeah, I would agree. It's interesting. I had a conversation with Whoopi Goldberg where she took a break from Twitter.
Yeah.
Because it was just so. She said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, people will say things to me on Twitter that they would never say to my face, right? And the things that were said to her, because she's outspoken, you can imagine, right? And she's one of the few people who monitors her own and runs her own social, right?
Wow.
Within the Hollywood community. And that was actually how I got a chance to connect with her, just because I was at a Advertising Week New York event probably 8 or 9 years ago. And she was extremely authentic up on stage talking about funding the documentary about Mom's Mabley that she was funding out of her own pocket. And then she crowdfunded it to a great extent with social media. But the conversation on stage for the panel that she was running, the moderator got into the fact that she was running her own social. She really talked about the emotional drain that it was on her. And then shortly thereafter, I think it was during the election when things got particularly divisive on Twitter. She actually took a break and came back. I was sort of watching to see if she would eventually come back, and she did. But people don't realize the emotional toll that a you can say anything to anybody ecosystem puts on people, and I think that makes it harder for advertising to break through too.
Oh, absolutely.
Talk about a brand unsafe environment. I mean, that's a real brand unsafe environment.
No, I mean, this is, oddly enough, you look at, promoted tweets and how they're captioned and, depending on what they say, right? If you're for example, if you're Monster and you want to promote your latest, diversity and equity and inclusion white paper download that sort of helps you, get your enterprise business, you're going to use LinkedIn, you might use Facebook, you might use Instagram, but you're going to stay the heck away from Twitter because you know exactly what's going to happen when you promote that content on that platform. And, frankly, I think Twitter absolutely has the ability and really in my opinion, the obligation, both for their shareholders and for the broader community, to make it a more brand safe environment and to make it a safer environment generally for folks. And the whole conversation around, freedom of speech makes no sense to me, because the concept of freedom of speech is that Congress doesn't make laws prohibiting Twitter from being able to kick off who they want to kick off. That is freedom of speech in the United States, not anyone can post anything anywhere they want. That concept is not enshrined in law. No one can come to your house, Kevin, and shout, slurs on your porch. You can tell them to go away. And that is your freedom of speech being exercised, not their freedom of speech being exercised. So, Twitter is a private company, and they get to choose what they allow and don't allow on their platform. And I wish they made better choices.
I agree. And, the analogy I often use with regards to the free speech issue is that, there's a difference between a town square and somebody on a soapbox, a town square with somebody on a soapbox with a megaphone, a town square with somebody on a soapbox and 23,000 watts of speaker power behind it. Right? At a certain point, being able to say anything you want into, a 40,000 watt, amplifier, that's, the rules change once you've got that kind of, reach and tonnage behind it.
And it's very different if you are doing that with no matter what kind of wattage in a public space versus on a private corporation's property, right? And Twitter is a private corporation's property. So, I just don't buy these arguments of like, well, once you get big enough, then you're now the public square. No, you're only the public square if you're the government. That is where it starts and ends. I don't, there's no reading of the Constitution that can say, oh, Congress and also Twitter shall make no law to abridge the rights of the people. No, that's not what the Constitution says.
Well, obviously the corporation can decide that it wants to enable,
It can. Well, so I think that, one of the interesting things certainly is you can look across Twitter's, vast and varied history and sort of say, hey, one of the things that, in its early days, Twitter was such a welcoming space because they did not have many of these problems. The problems emerged, became exacerbated, especially during the 2016 and 2020 elections. And then I think arguably have become quite a bit better in the last 18 months after, post the election and post Twitter kind of taking action against, especially folks who supported the January 6th insurrection. I think that made Twitter's ecosystem better and safer. And you could see it in your comments, right? Like my comments and replies got much better. Geraldine's comments and replies just got much better. A lot of her women friends, were like, oh, Twitter feels a little safer and better these days. That seems like a great thing. I wish they would keep going in that direction. It slightly worries me, it actually significantly worries me that, this potential new owner is considering removing this this policy of making improvements?
So let's switch gears to the Twitter's monetization issues, which I think are intertwined with some of the issues we just discussed. But when I wear my marketer hat and I think about paid media more so than earned media, obviously it has its earned media social element to it, but it earns money as itself. Its profits come from selling advertising. And while there has been some talk about some kind of a paid model with regards to members paying for premium, and they've dabbled in that area, it's pretty nascent. And so the problem they have to fix is on the ad side as well. And when I think about ad platforms, I think about, well, the ad needs to break through the clutter, and it needs to be well targeted, either based on context or demographics or behavior, right? So on some slice that a marketer could say, oh, that's my customer, right? And obviously, Facebook and Google have a huge advantage with regards to the data that they've got. IDFA's put a bit of a crimp on Facebook's ability to use the data that they have with regards to some of its ad distribution. But Twitter sort of is out there and has sparsity of data, and it also has problems with the ads getting through the clutter given the what the surrounding content is. So if you were just going to walk in and sort of help the Twitter ad ops team rebuild that and think about, okay, how do we make sure that the ads are more relevant? Are there ways we can know more about the individual the way that Facebook does it? It doesn't impinge on people's privacy? And are there ways that we can make the ads more relevant so that marketers actually want to put those ads there? Do you have any silver bullets and suggestions for the new or existing owners on that?
Yeah, gosh. Let's see. So I think that oftentimes when outsiders like us theorize about problems internally, there are many issues that we are unaware of. And so if anyone from Twitter is actually watching and listening, I am certain that they would say, well, but you're not considering this thing that you don't know about. We are not. So with only what is available to us publicly, I will say this: Twitter's ad platform to purchase and target ads is among the least sophisticated and worst UI and UX of the major networks. That feels like an obvious place to invest effort and see lift, even if nothing else about the platform itself improves. The targeting, the reporting, the ability to buy against certain audiences or not. Very strange, right? It seems to me obvious that you could say, hey, I would like to show ads to people who follow the overlap of these three accounts.
Right.
That seems like a super obvious. I don't think you can do that. If you can do that, it is incredibly unobvious how you do that. And the data, when presented back to you, doesn't tell you that. You can actually do a better job of analyzing that through Twitter's own free API than through their ad offerings. That's batty. That's just weird. Like, here you go, whatever, SparkToro, you can use the free API and figure this stuff out. You advertiser who's paying us, you cannot.
Right. As a matter of fact, that's some of the stuff that I like most in SparkToro, right? Is looking at the Venn diagram intersections and having SparkToro tell me people who follow these also follow those, right? And then, you end up with the sort of famous, beer and diapers analogy from the supermarket that did like two things that are very likely to be in the shopping cart together that may not be obvious, right? Only on hindsight are they obvious. And the same thing happens when you use the SparkToro tool. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, some of these I totally see, like, why they're in the same list. And then others, you have a little bit of an aha moment and you think to yourself, why is that? And it leads you down a little bit of a path where you can learn more about an audience as a result. So
this is exactly right. The other day I was analyzing an actor who's famous for her role on a show called Winona Earp, and I was looking at her account, her followers, right? Analysis of her followers, and I saw that like a surprising number of them played role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games, like Dungeons and Dragons. I thought, oh, that's really interesting to dig into exactly what's going on there. It turns out there's a big overlap in the fandom of the show overall and the GLBTQIA kind of community that follows that show, that are big fans of it, and the overlap of certain sectors of the world of gaming. And I thought to myself, my God, this is super valuable data. You shouldn't need SparkToro to figure this out. Twitter should make this clear to whatever, you, the person, like, hey, your audience is also interested in all these things. I don't know if you remember what Twitter's Insights product used to look like. Do you remember they used to show like a bunch of analytics and insights about your audience? It wasn't perfect. It was a little awkward and like the buckets were sort of strange, but they took it away entirely. I feel like that's the kind of thing you could charge for. Yeah. If you said $3 a month and we'll give you lots of insights into your audience and tell you all these things about them. I mean, this is somewhat self-serving, but I don't care, right? They should buy SparkToro and make it part of that paid offering, or just freaking put us out of business by building it themselves, right? Build it yourself, put SparkToro out of business. I mean, obviously we analyze networks that aren't Twitter, but make that something that advertisers at the least can get, and hopefully every account could pay for and get. I don't know, call me crazy. It just seems like there's a lot of low-hanging, obvious fruit. And I think that company's dysfunction partly stems from their history and partly stems from just I think a ton of politics internally around leadership and who they've got on the team and what those varying team beliefs are. I think, unfortunately, they don't have a shared coalition at the board, CEO, C-suite, and executive leadership level that let them operate like a functional entity. I actually think very highly of Parag Agrawal, and I really wish him the best. I think that he could do an outstanding job if he were given free rein to make the right kinds of decisions. Maybe some of these decisions he's making right now about who to keep and let go, I don't know the politics, and maybe he's letting go of the best people. I have no idea, but it certainly seems to me that dysfunction is way too public and well known. We shouldn't know how bad things are going, the way we do. And that company gets an outsized amount of scrutiny to its size. I'm sure that's part of the problem too.
Yeah. It brings me to an area that sort of ties into search a little bit, because, search tends to operate at the bottom of the funnel. And one other thing that happens more often at the bottom of the funnel is marketers thinking about conquest advertising, right? And when you think about conquest advertising, you think about it from the perspective of keywords if you're doing search. But then if you're thinking about conquest advertising from the perspective of a brand, right, being able to go see sort of what is the universe around that brand look like from a social perspective, that's sort of a similar to the insights tool, but again, then being able to buy the advertising against it, right? Facebook allows, right? So you can target against followers of certain things in certain categories, some of which are brands, right? And so, building this sort of persona, social persona about, and using your competitors' data, right? Who may be 20 times your size, right? Because you're an upstart in that category. And they're the leader in the category, right? They're one of the largest gyms in the United States, and you're like a new gym, and you're like, how do I get who are these people and where do they hang out? What do they talk about, right? Tools like that in search and tools like that in social facilitate sort of the lower funnel marketing, which is the high ROI stuff. So I'd love to hear if you've got any thoughts as to how your clients have done that, right? Using SparkToro, sort of. Because unless somebody shows you it on SparkToro, it's not immediately apparent that you could do that, right? But I think it's one of my favorite things to go in there, because obviously you can go in there at the celebrity level just for like fun and waste hours jumping down these rabbit holes and trying to glue things together. But then, when you start to look at the bigger brands, you could, I'm sure, look at Starbucks, right? And look at their social profile and glean a whole lot of things about the Starbucks customer from that.
Yeah. So I think we really have kind of a small handful of use cases that are really strong with, sorry, let me shut my notifications, that are really strong with the audience that uses SparkToro. And one of them absolutely is this sort of strategic marketer trying to understand their audience's behaviors and demographics versus, for example, their competition and the broader field. And then compare and contrast those. I did a little video on this that I put on LinkedIn and Twitter the other day. But so this is basically, I had a call with someone. They walked me through their process for doing this SparkToro. I was like, oh man, you're a genius. This is great. Like, I need to take notes on how you're doing that. Right. And they're essentially building personas or audience profiles that they realize are in various parts of a potential customer journey. And then they are using the data from not just SparkToro, but SparkToro plus, surveys and interviews and potentially, clickstream data like a SimilarWeb or Datos or whatever. And then they're coming to conclusions about what will influence that audience's behavior. How do we get these people to think of our brand when they have this problem? And I think this is the core of marketing, right? The core of marketing is you give the right message, a resonant message to the people who need it at the time they need it from a source that they trust. Marketing, right? So yeah, I think it's wonderful that SparkToro enables this. I think we have a long way to go before we can do this, as cleanly and efficiently with all the data that people really need. But maybe we're on the path. Hopefully we're on the path.
So I have a question that goes back to a decision you may have made a long time ago with regards to personal branding. And you and I have both done speaking engagements. I think I totaled mine up, and they're well in the high 500s.
Oh, wow.
I've been in speaking engagements in the last 28 years. But you had a personal brand, like when you were on stage keynoting or even just doing a panel. And maybe not everybody realizes what that personal brand is. You may not be exhibiting it right now because you'd have to put your feet up in the air. But
I know what you're talking about now.
You made a decision at that point that, like, hey, when I'm out there, right, and I'm in my speaking persona, I'm going to be notable in a way that like nobody else is notable. So what was the catalyst for that? Was there a particular time where you actually thought about it and said, this is what I'm going to do when I go on stage?
Oh yeah. So I started wearing them actually. Kevin is referring to, for those who might not know, I was historically known, at least when I was in the SEO world and Moz world, for wearing bright yellow shoes, like this color yellow, and that stemmed from actually my very first conference that I ever went to, which was Search Engine Strategies in New York. I think it was 2004, maybe, and I told some people on the forums that I participated in, Search Engine Watch forums, which of course was owned by the same people as the conference, and Create a Site and all these other folks, people including folks like Barry Schwartz, right, who is very prominent in the industry, or Danny Sullivan, right, who ran SES. I was like, hey, I'm going to be wearing these yellow sneakers. So if you see me there, please say hi. I would love to catch up with all the people that I only know from the online world. This is pre-social media days, so you couldn't really see each other in person on social.
Have headshots,
yeah, totally.
I mean, there were no headshots. You wouldn't know what the person looked like.
Exactly. It was very early days for sort of connecting with people over the web, and I was super young. I was like 20, 24, 25, right? So very young, but I wore these yellow shoes, and some people came up to, including Barry. I think Barry Schwartz was the first person who came up to me, and he was like, hey, you must be Rand Fishkin because I see your shoes. And we had a conversation, kicked off a friendship that's been going now for, another 16, 17 years. And that was true for many other folks as well. So it was really less a personal branding move and more hey, you'll recognize me at this thing we're going to, right? And then it kind of turned into a meme. It was just, well, I guess I should do this again because it was really successful at that one conference. So the next few conferences I went to, and then when I started getting invited to speak, I wore the yellow shoes again, and then it became a habit, a tradition. And so I think even the the shoes were falling apart, Kevin, like falling apart at the end. I got a second pair, but even those were falling apart. And yeah, I think the last time I wore them was maybe my last MozCon, which was probably 2017, 2018. So semi-retired. They're still sitting in my closet. We'll see. Maybe there'll be a day where it makes sense to put them on.
Right. So on the for the upcoming year, right, for marketers who are sort of maybe struggling with how to allocate budgets most efficiently, but what has you most excited, like of where you think budgets might be migrating to versus where budgets might be migrating from? If let's say a performance marketer in particular, as opposed to a branding marketer.
Man, I gotta say, it is very hard to know the answer to that. So outside of the economic condition that we might be going through, sort of at least in the US and maybe globally, I have been seeing folks, certainly in my world, think more about investing in hard to measure, serendipitous channels and tactics that you can't perfectly attribute in your analytics, because they recognize that you can get lift from that and demand generation and growth, even if you can't pinpoint what did it, right? So, hey, let's get a podcast marketing strategy. We're going to go on a bunch of podcasts. We're going to sponsor some podcasts. We're going to create our own podcast, right? Those kinds of things. Ooh, incredibly difficult to attribute, because you can't do geographic specific types of things, because podcasts, of course, are distributed everywhere. Time series is really tough because you're hopefully doing lots of other marketing things the same time these podcasts are coming out. So unless you're really small, it's hard to tell. But if you believe in it and you invest in it, probably it will have lift. And I've been seeing people do those kinds of I believe in them investments. That being said, I don't know what a potential economic shrinkage, recession, those kinds of things could do to it. And I think, it looks to me like it's going to be a very weird type of recession, right? A recession where essentially it is almost like intentionally government sponsored, because people are more worried about inflation than they are about recession. And so kind of politically speaking, it seems like it's worth addressing inflation, even at the cost of economic growth for a few quarters. And maybe that's the right decision. I don't know. But yeah, I think we could find ourselves in an environment that kind of rapidly turns around, sort of like the COVID, those first few months were incredibly scary, tons of shrinkage in the economy for a few months. And then there was just massive amounts of, pent up demand getting let loose. Maybe we're going to go through one of those again, in which case, probably, if marketers are feeling that and brands are feeling that, you might actually see a lot of that continued, push into less attributable channels. But I'll be honest, I don't talk to a tremendous number of performance marketers who say, oh yeah, we're going to stop doing attributable stuff. I talk to some directors of marketing and CMOs and brands and agencies who broadly think about that, but I don't think performance is going anywhere.
Yeah, I would agree that there is an enthusiasm for a sort of resurgence in investing in creative of various types, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's often it takes multiple formats, right? So obviously podcasts can be audio only, they can be video podcasts as well. You've got this sort of continuum from earned media into sort of, then you get branded content, and then you got owned media, and like things getting syndicated and also existing on the blogs. And I think that part of what's fueling that is the continued escalation in time spent by consumers and business decision makers in consuming social media video content, for example, right? So, I mean, I think TikTok overtook YouTube, right? And YouTube was already gigantic, right? And so where is this, where are those eyeballs migrating from, right? And what is the content that they were consuming before versus the content that they're consuming now? And so I think as marketers see their own behaviors changing and see the behaviors of their target audiences changing, they're basically saying, oh, well, I can't buy all of this, so I have to sort of go into content creation mode. And of course, in SEO, content's been king, since day one, right? If you didn't have the content, you couldn't rank for it. So
absolutely.
The good news is, there's a big chunk of marketers who understand content creation and the double duty that you get out of content, right? And even I think the PR industry has sort of had this epiphany where they used to think about PR as you get the hit and it happened Thursday morning on a morning show, and then you were done and you wrote it up and you can patted yourself on the back, right? And like, well, at least the more forward-thinking PR agencies realize, no, that's also an SEO opportunity from a link perspective, and it's an SEO opportunity because that will probably be in the SERP for a long, long time, and it may rank, in the top 5 for a long, long time because the place that it ran has huge authority for Google, and it's likely to rank there. And so this holistic view of, digital content, or digitally distributed content, earned media in particular, being part of SEO because you're trying to control the entire SERP, not just your own domain's ranking. You have to think about digital PR, social media that was created for, the purpose of just being on your channel, as well as social media you co-created with somebody else. Like, this all feeds into that. And I think that's part of what's been the engine of growth for this resurgence and excitement for content. Because you're like, okay, I've got many social media mouths to feed. I've got my Instagram, I got my TikTok, I got my Facebook, and I got my, I'm still supposed to do my blog, and then I'm doing digital PR, right? And so that's, I think, part of what I see driving this enthusiasm for that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
And I don't think it's going away either,
No, absolutely not. And Kevin, I apologize. I am going to have to run in just a couple minutes, but
sure.
yeah.
So, any parting thoughts for things that you're doing with SparkToro that you can talk about now that people should?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of product stuff, two of the big things we've been asked for is tracking over time. So, like, I care about this audience. I want to reach chemical engineers in the UK, or interior designers in Los Angeles, or I want to reach people who play Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I am interested in that audience all the time, not just one time. And so we've actually built, but we have to figure out how to productize and launch this feature that allows you to say, okay, follow, the audience of chemical engineers in the UK and tell me about new things that they do, new hashtags they're using, new podcasts that they're listening to, new YouTube channels they started subscribing to, new blogs and websites they started visiting. I think that's probably going to be useful to a lot of folks who have one audience that they really care about, or several that they really care about a lot all the time. And then the second thing is, right now, today, one of the things that SparkToro is worst at, in fact, terrible at, is anything outside of English. So we bias to cover basically only English language profiles and accounts. We are testing German now and hopefully Spanish by the end of the year. We'll see where we get to. It's a challenging process. We don't speak a whole lot of German and Spanish, so we've been using some outside help to try and validate and all that kind of thing. But it's an interesting process. And yeah, in terms of broadly in the market, I think that we'll probably see a small contraction of demand. But my suspicion is it's going to be short-lived, if I had to guess. And so I am guessing that marketers who continue to invest in brand demand generation and brand awareness right now are going to benefit both probably short-term, but very seriously long-term.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Rand. It was a pleasure catching up.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kevin. Take care.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.